today's social system mapping deep dive session for August 7th, not July 17th. I didn't change that. 2023. What am I doing? Okay, so your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, co-founder of sumApp and Greater Than the Sum, and Kara Martiner, who's our producer and tech support person. So if you get stuck or need anything, feel free to ping Kara in the DM, in the chat. And for those of you who are new to this group and to this context, and we have there's a few of you who are new, so we're really always thrilled to have new people. So welcome, especially to the new people. And so for those of you for whom this is the first time, what this is essentially it's built upon a vision about a possibility, the possibility being that social system mapping, which is this kind of mapping that we're focused on, can help transformation communities and networks that are working on social and ecological transformation and any kind of systemic transformation, can help those groups become more self-organizing and more effective more quickly than they would without social system mapping. So that's the vision, and that's what we're working on, turning from a possibility into a reality. So it's a learning experience to learn about social system mapping, but it's also an opportunity to contribute your own experience and insight, because social system mapping isn't just about the technical aspects, and it's just not just about the analytical aspects of what you can see in a map, but it's also about a social process and a learning together and a shared shifting of thinking and interacting. And so you all have a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom around those shifting dimensions, even if you've never seen a social system map in your life. So it's also an opportunity for you to contribute your own experience and insight. And then lastly, for the moment, it's a community of practice. So there are a handful of us who meet regularly to work on how do we make this possibility more of a reality, how do we learn together, and how do we develop this praxis and methodology. And so this community of practice, though, again, is not just built on the mapping piece itself, but also on the social processes that exist around it. So regardless of what brings you to this, if there's any resonance and interest in helping learn from us and share with us, you're welcome to join the community practice. You're invited, warmly invited to. So today's objectives is that you'll come away with a sense of the potential that you were inspired by. This is not a context where you're going to learn a new trick or learn a new tool and that you can take away and apply right away, because social system mapping is big and complex and a process that emerges over time. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is just getting okay with recognizing that this is something that we're feeling our way into and discovering together. And it's not the mapping itself that we're feeling our way into so much as it's the shift that the mapping is trying to create. And so we hope you'll come away with at least a sense of the potential, and that you'll meet some cool folks and feel welcomed by them, and that you come away with at least a little bit of curiosity about how social system mapping can support a network in learning how to deal with systems change and complexity. And today, actually, I didn't read my bullets very carefully. We're not going to explore useful frameworks. We're going to talk about the shifts that we're trying to create a bit more. So the agenda for today is we'll do welcome and introductions. That's right, what we're doing now and in a moment. And then we're going to walk through the introduction to social system mapping and our theory of transformation. And that explains why we think it's a useful practice. And then we'll do some breakouts so you guys can get to connect with a couple other people again, a little deeper. And then we're going to come back out in together. And I'm going to just think about out loud some of the cognitive shift, which is a piece of this puzzle that we talk about. So focus a little bit more on the cognitive shift and then go back into breakouts with the same group and explore what we just talked about. So that's our agenda for this morning. And I just want to say that to any of you that this is sort of the rough plan. But if you don't want to go in a breakout, don't feel like you have to, or if you go in a breakout and you feel like, oh, I don't want to go back into that same breakout again, I'm not, if don't feel like you have to, whatever it is, and for whatever reasons, take care of yourself first before you follow along with what the rest of us are doing. And which includes if you need to be off video or on video, whatever. I just want to highlight, this is all by choice, not by command. Okay, so in the chat for our introductions, for starting, I'd like you to share your name, pronouns, and location, again, to the degree, whichever parts of that you want to and are comfortable, in the chat. And sometimes if it seems like I'm waiting for you to do something and you don't want to do it, feel free to just say, I'm not going to do it in the chat so that I won't wait. Because my waiting can be a pressure and I don't want that to be the case. I just want to make space for everybody. So welcome. So I'm going to just call out just say the names of our newest people. Marcia, welcome from Alberta, and Veronica from Texas, welcome. Mary Patrick from Kenya, and Amy Deming. If you all have been here before and I just called you out as a brand new person, I apologize for not remembering having seen you, but I'm excited to see all of you and happy to have new faces and new names be part of our being together today. Okay, after that, let's go ahead and put in a network that you're working with. So it could be a network, it could be a context, it could be a field, but it's some sort of context in which you're thinking about how might social system mapping support this context. And so food collaborative, nice. Donut economics and relational coordination. This context, American Friends Service Committee context, resource mobilizer, community practice, learning and practice. Interesting. Cambridge and open innovation for church leaders. Yep. Water equity. We've got a interesting good map that was made on water issues and water systems and equity from our community. And then Alex is working in a bunch of contexts. Okay. And then let's think about a hard to solve network challenge that you experience, a piece of this puzzle that is tough to chew on. Mary Patrick is working with a SAIDS organization in Kenya with helping youth with systems thinking skills. So that's really right up our alley because we're always thinking about that as well. That's great. And a challenge. If there's a challenge that feels particularly present for you. Yeah. Engaging partners and explaining the commitment. That's a big one. Changing how we think. People grasping how change happens. Those are, yeah, getting past the pretty picture silos. Yep. I'd say these are really common themes that I hear over and over again. And struggle with in our own contexts, and always, so we're all sort of always working on this. Okay, so let's hold those in our mind, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. So for those of you who are new, I'm going to walk rather quickly and briefly through what is social system mapping, what it is.
Christine,
Yeah.
share your screen real quick for us.
Oh, thank you. Good. Sure. I appreciate anybody who sees I'm forgetting something or need to notice something. Anybody jumping into that is welcome to do so. So thank you, Kara. So what is social system mapping? It is essentially a mashup, really, of a range of other kinds of maps. For instance, a social network map, an asset map might be included in a social system mapping project, concept map, a system map, a stakeholder map. So all of these kinds of maps can sort of get clumped together in a social system map, and they will look really similar to, you know, all of these other kinds of maps. There will be dots and lines, and that will look on the surface like it's pretty much the same thing, but it's actually a social system map includes dimensions of all of these kinds of maps, and all of these kinds of maps are generally rather, you know, flat, dimensionally flat, in that they're only looking at elements of a system in the causal loop. So they're only looking at assets in the system, et cetera. Whereas a social system map has all of these things all together, all at once. So, and also tracks these things, parts of these things over time, and it's kept up to date. So it's far more dimensional than any of those kinds of maps. And it's not just a snapshot in time, so that it evolves. So it's a lot more complex and messy. But it's also a lot more rich in terms of what kinds of relationships and system elements we can see using it. It's also online, interactive, and accessible to every member of a network. It's iterative, emergent, dynamic. It's an ongoing collective practice. And so I like to say it's a process more than a product. It's not just we have this outcome and we have this map, but we're continually coming back to it and updating it and refining it and learning from it. So why do we do that? It sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. So the purpose, the reason we're doing that is basically the point of social system mapping is to support systemic transformation. And what we've learned over the last couple decades, those of us who have worked in networks or system transformation for a while, is that systemic transformation, okay, let me back up. Social system mapping is essentially about supporting a global movement to shift from systems of dominance and exploitation and extraction to systems of connection, reverence, and regeneration. But what we've learned about what's necessary to make those shifts is that supporting systemic transformation requires essentially two things. This is a distilled reductionist version of it, but it's the two major components is strong networks of, and that's so strong networks of wise change agents. So we need strong networks of relationships, but we also need to be increasing people's understanding of systems, living systems, especially in complexity. So I talk a lot about the two shifts. You'll hear me in our context, I'm always referring to the two shifts. One of those shifts is the relational shift, where we're learning to understand ourselves or relearning to understand ourselves as part of a, just going to show the pictures, which is going from how we've become, which is a separate self, this isolated, hard-edged single thing, to more porous and more aware of others and more ultimately connected. So going from being a separate self to being an enmeshed and interdependent being with self, connected to not only other human beings, but all other living beings and to the planet, and so being an interbeing kind of a person. together. So there's that shift, which I call the relational shift. And then there's the cognitive shift, which often when we're working on weaving networks, we're very focused on building relationships, and those people, as we're building relationships, we get very focused on taking action. But the wise change agent piece is as necessary as the relational piece if we actually want to make system change. If we want to be healing as individuals and in relationship to one another, maybe we don't need to understand systems as well. But if we're actually trying to make changes beyond our specific context or our specific group, we for sure need to have a better understanding of complexity. And so we say that this is a shift from a mechanistic worldview, where we've got gears and hard edges and parts, to a much more living systems or complex worldview, where we understand that change isn't just about direct action or pushing a button, or that we can't just go get from A to Z in one fell swoop without really thinking about how systems, living systems especially, change, and having more insight into that. So essentially, we can say that these two shifts, this relational shift and the cognitive shift, are really the same thing, because they really, no matter how we're thinking about it, they are about shifting our perspective from the nodes in the system, or the causes, or the individuals, or the parts of the system, into a much more intense awareness and focused awareness on the dynamics between the parts, the relationships, the flows, the connections among the parts. And so you could say, well, that's relational. That's a relational shift. Why do you have to focus on the cognitive shift, Christine? And if they're the same thing, why do we have to differentiate these two shifts? And the answer is because this is, if we look at this picture, this cone-like thing in the middle that is, pretending to be three-dimensional, can be a stand-in for the overall shift. This is the shift we're trying to make. This is the change that we're trying to create. But we're, as humans, often not able to see all the angles of something from all at once. And we're sort of trained to look one-dimensionally. And so if we see this change only from a relational perspective, so this orange sort of projection here, we see it one way and we interpret it one way, and we think about how to move forward based on what we're seeing there. If we look at it from this other angle, the purple projection angle, what we're looking at looks really different. And they're both true. And so if we only look at it from one angle, our actions will leave out, there will be a lot obscured, whichever angle it is. I'm seeing, Marcia, I'm seeing your question. I'll come back to that maybe, assuming I'm capable. I am, but sort of. Anyway, so what we're saying is that this transition from systems of dominance to systems of connection requires both of these perspectives, and it's actually, this is a really reductionist, simplified perspective as well. I'm just, it's to make a point about the need for us to be working along both those tracks of understanding complexity in living systems, as well as working on relationships. And we need to go back and forth between the two, because everything is always changing. So if we're, we look at it from one angle and then we go live in the other angle for the next 5 years, and then come back again after a while and look at it from that other angle again, so much will have changed that we'll discover that we're no longer moving in the direction we want to be. So that's the two shifts that I talk about a lot, and I'm going to come back and talk more about the cognitive shift in a bit. But we like to say that social system mapping supports both shifts. So we've got both the relational shift going on, and we've got the cognitive shift going on, and they feed into each other, and it's messy and confusing and beautiful and challenging. And this is what we are thinking that and practicing working with how social system mapping can support us in both those shifts, sort of in tandem, in parallel. So what makes us think that's true? Well, so I'm going to now share with you quickly our social system mapping theory of transformation, which is that essentially in the beginning of some kind of a group, there are these people on the ground. They maybe know each other or know about each other, or maybe they don't, but they have, whether they know each other or not, whether they're already coordinated in some way or not, they have some systemic or some kind of change or way that they're working on, or they want to work on to make the world better, basically, to make life more just better in all the various ways that it's clearly, obviously not at the moment. And so they have this common intention, and they begin to be aware that there are others with this common intention, or they're talking to each other. They're beginning to think about how coming together in some way can help enhance the work that they want to be contributing to the world, and enhance, make their efforts ripple out further and become more effective in the world. So there's a concept of rippling out, connecting to make this change happen that we're looking for. At some point, some of these people, these are not necessarily, these might be, some of these people will decide to take responsibility to start to catalyze the potential that they're sensing in this group of people with a similar intention. So hoping I have an airplane going overhead. Hope it's not. Okay, Carrie's saying no, not hearing it. Okay, great. So these people might be, sometimes they're the staff of a foundation. Often they're just members of this community on the ground. They might be a nonprofit that is developing around this intention, but wherever they come from, they choose to start to catalyze this potential. So this orange swath, going back to the previous images, is relational capacity. So they're starting to meet, they're starting to build their shared awareness, they're connecting with each other, and then they start to do some kind of convening with the people on the ground. They start to pull them into meetings and do various, liberating structures or whatever kinds of processes, art of hosting kinds of stuff that they feel will help support this potential in manifesting, and help support these people build relationships and build stronger relationships. So they start this process of catalyzing and convening along the relational shift, building relationships, building connection. At some point, these people who are feeling some sense of responsibility or commitment to this overall potential, they'll start to realize that they need to know more. So they see people showing up and they hear the conversations, but there's a whole lot more that they realize that they don't know about people when they show up, such as, who's working, who's got which perspective, which stakeholder perspective within the system, or who's working on what kind of strategies, or who has what kind of skills or what kind of assets they could bring, or who has what kinds of needs. They just, whatever it is, they start to realize that they need to understand more. And about this network, part of that more is often who's already working with who and who's not working with who, what are the relationships and what's flowing through this network, as well as the dimensions of the people in the network or the organizations in the network. So they may not think of this, they probably won't think of this as a social system map, but they'll start to conceive of this pile of information that they want, and they want to start to gather somehow from the network. And if we're lucky and they're lucky, at somewhere along the line, as they're starting to figure out how can we get this information, how can we have greater insight into all these dimensions of our network, they'll come across the concept of social system mapping. And at some in this evolution that I'm calling out, not obviously in every case, but in this evolution, they'll say, oh, let's make a social system map. So they will get started to create a social system map. That map at first most of these people on the ground aren't going to know what a social system map is. They're not going to be terribly interested. They're going to be thinking, oh, we want to, get to work doing this, or we want to do that, or that sounds really sort of potentially extractive, where everyone's exhausted by surveys, or potentially exploitive in some way, or controlling, or evaluative. At any rate, understandably, lots of people have various kinds of resistance to things like this mapping, et cetera, data gathering, et cetera. So they would rather be interested in doing other things like community building, et cetera. That's all perfectly, that's understandable given the history of how the problems that we currently have emerged. Maps have been used as tools of dominance, and extracting data has been used as tools of dominance. And so it's understandable to be hesitant about a social system map. But what that means is that at first, there's not going to be a ton of interest in the social system map development, even though the more you can engage the people on the ground and the more input you can get from the different perspectives, the better the map's going to be. So there's already this sort of tension about who develops the mapping language and the mapping content, and the problem compared to the problem of getting people to engage with it. So with the paradigm of social system mapping, that's fine. That's not a problem. We just go ahead and get started. So these people create some kind of a survey that gets some kind of information from this community, and it gets put into a map, and then the whole community is able to access the map. The people, the catalysts, the guardians, whatever you want to call them, the people in the middle, the core people, will start to use that map both to understand the things that they were looking to understand in the first place about who's who in the network, and also to start to do some relationship building throughout the network. So that's an early stage of a good social system mapping process, acknowledging that the people in the center might not have all the perspectives that would be helpful to have in there. They might not have all the experiences that in an ideal world would have informed that survey, but it's a starting point. And one of the biggest benefits of that starting point is that then these people on the ground start to have a sense of what a social system map is. Often they're more sort of mildly curious, but not inclined to jump right into it, but they can kind of start to see the value. And as these core people or catalyst people use the map and talk more about the map and share with the whole community how the map is helping them build the community, connect people, learn more, etc., the people on the ground will start to say, oh, well, if we're going to use this thing, it should have this question, or I think that question is alienating to these people, and so that language should be changed, or why didn't you ask that? Whatever it is, they'll start to have opinions, which is wonderful, and they'll start to give feedback, which is great. And so then the mappers can say, oh, yes, let's take that input and let's craft some new questions for the map, and let's do another round of data gathering. So when that happens, now the data is getting a little closer to the intention of the overall network's purpose, and a little bit more aligned and valuable to the network as a whole. And in that process, more people are sort of stepping in to leadership. They're starting to see the system better, see where more relationships could be built, et cetera. And so this whole relational tissue gets strengthened. And in that process, as we're continuing to use the map to explore, et cetera, more input comes in, we get more feedback. And again, we start to ooch the data in the map even closer to the purpose. It starts to get even more aligned and more context specific and more valuable and relevant because it's designed by the network. It gets closer and closer to the needs of the overall network. So the data is getting closer to the center. And in this process, we start to actually go beyond just relationship building and connection building and creating a relational strong system, but start to use the map to explore complexity and systems thinking, because we have all of this overlap of dimensionality. It's that messiness, that complexity, that sort of overabundance of information that is in the real world is also reflected in the map. The map is, really sort of illustrates the dynamic, the components of the system and the relationships across it. So we start to use the map to see patterns and to see where there are gaps in the network and where there, strategies that we think need to be attended to, but they're not being attended to. So we can start to really use the map for complexity thinking and systems thinking. So that's that purple bit. And it's light and wispy at first, but if we keep exploring the map and updating the map, it gets stronger. The map gets even closer to the purposes of the network. And then eventually, and this is our hypothesis, eventually the data and the systems thinking and the relationships all sort of in a mature state are very lined up. It's still very dynamic. There's still, lots shifting, but they're pulled closer and closer together into this sort of vortex of aligned activity. So that is our theory of transformation for social system mapping. I'm stopping. Hang on a second. Did I miss something? Okay. So Kara, I hope that you have taken the cue to make some breakout rooms. How many do you have in a room?
I have 2 groups of 3 and a group of 4, and that is fine for you. I just need to know how long.
Okay, so let's do 5 minutes now, and then we'll come back and talk about the cognitive shift a bit, and then we'll put them back into the same rooms. Is everybody? Oh, and so before we go, for this brief breakout, I invite you to just go ahead and introduce yourselves again and your network challenge, and just sort of connect and see how you each fit into this context to the degree you're interested and willing. So, and then we'll go a little deeper next time. So any questions before we go into the breakouts? Okay, Kara, go ahead. Welcome back, everyone. I see some smiles, so I'm hoping that means you had a good conversation. I know it's always too short, but so I hope you had a good few minutes and are looking forward to more conversation. So I'm going to just share my screen again. And so, okay, first of all, I want to go back and Marcia, address your question in the chat, which is skills or abilities needed by the individuals leading the social system change. What are the prerequisites prior to learning about social system mapping? I'm going to answer briefly myself, and then I'm going to invite anyone who's been doing this for a while to share their thinking as well. There's a need for someone who is technically comfortable diving in and figuring things out at a minimum, or depending on your context, if you have a high sort of need for things to get done within deadlines and to be not to minimize the messiness of the whole thing, you might want somebody who's experienced and proficient at dealing with the technical pieces so that they can just sort of pick things up and run with the changes and move relatively quickly. But so whether it's very, very skillful or at least willing to jump in and play and comfortable with that, you need somebody who can do the technical piece. As far as what we refer to sort of 4 hats for social system mapping. One is the technical hat, one is the envisioning hat. The envisioning hat is really important for getting the project started. It will help us to help, like what I just did, what I just walked you all through, that is sort of our emergent envisioning in a really generic context, but it helps people understand the value of the project and be interested in participating in it. And so that, you know, that the idea for doing it, and then the ideas for what should we include in the design of it, are the envisioning hat. And that is, you won't get very far if you don't have someone who's a persistent envisioner, sort of, you know, charging forward, regardless of whether other people see a value in it or not, or doing their best to help other people see the value. So envisioning, technical, and then sense making. And this is probably the most undeveloped, and not probably, it is the most undeveloped skill set that we have in this context, because we're all learning. And so I would say that a curiosity about living systems, a curiosity about what does all of this mean, and what does all of this take, not just this meaning the map, but this meaning how we move forward as human beings on the planet. Just a curiosity and a willingness to explore, and to sort of slow down, and to help others get present and learn to perceive more broadly, I think is the core requirement. So having some systems thinking training may be helpful, and it may be not so helpful, but having a willingness to explore, I think, is the biggest piece of that. And then doing that exploring, whether it's here with us, or whether it's exploring complexity thinkers of all sorts, or just really persisting in exploring and framing questions within your community about what's possible to see on the map. I mean, all of those are ways into this. And I don't think there are any precise prerequisites. It's more of a mindset curiosity thing. And then the last skill set, or hat, thinking hat, that we refer to in social systems mapping. And this one is, well, actually, it's even less developed than the sense making one, but is just capturing and sharing the successes, the challenges, the insights, and just telling the story in teeny tiny ways and in larger ways over and over throughout the network, about how the map is helping, and about how people are using the map, because we don't historically we haven't had social system maps. Most people look at it and go, what do I do with it? So what? And learning, hearing what other people are doing, hearing how other people are benefiting from it, is absolutely crucial to helping people start even thinking of it as a resource that they could access, or as something that they could use to help develop greater shared understanding. So visioning, technical stuff, sense making, and storytelling all sort of are part of that, the many threads that we're trying to weave together in this process. And that generally means some collaboration, because most of us don't do all of those well at the same time. And so everything is always a weaving, even making a social system map, a weaving of something or another. So Marcia, and then I was going to see if anyone else, just make some space for others who have been doing this in the community to add to anything I've left out about skills or abilities needed. And we know there's a couple of you who are the suspects that I'm looking at, and I'm not seeing either of your faces jumping in. So Mary, go ahead.
I think what we're covering today is important, because for me, yeah, there's past experience, the relational, but that not enough of the complexity and systems thinking. And so ultimately it wasn't workable in the sense of the change that I was hoping for. So enough people I think it has to be more than one person who's holding that of wanting to look at it and the sense of complexity and systems thinking. It has to be a larger group.
Jim.
I was just thinking how oftentimes when we introduce a map in a community that's hungry for knowing themselves, that the visual directory aspect of it, the ability to see everybody on a map and in relation to each other, is so exciting and so useful in that moment of exploring. And then the place that you're going in this conversation about the deeper shifts, that's the piece of work that that's challenging for me in all the maps that I've done. So learning into that.
Thanks. Yeah, I would say that this is definitely an emergent practice, and we're all figuring this out together. Those of us here and in the, who come to these meetings regularly, are struggling with and challenged by and learning from each other together. And that's one of the reasons new faces are so thrilling, is because often we discover new things and we learn new ways of thinking about this and making sense with this from people who haven't been doing it forever and who come in and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then we go, oh, magic, yes, wonderful. So that's an invitation to, if this is interesting to you, an invitation to come back and help us think about this part, especially the cognitive shift. And so I'm just going to say a few things. I've been thinking about this cognitive shift business for sort of intensely for a while now. And in the last, week, I thought, oh, I'm going to talk about this for this session. And I just did a whole lot of reading, and my thinking is sort of like all doing this thing where everything, like it's all cross-pollinating, and my head hasn't all filtered out, distilled out now into discrete piles of this and this and this and this yet. So it's all still really actively moving around in my mind. And I didn't make the effort of trying to force it into piles prematurely for this session. So it might be a little circular or random feeling, but as I think about this cognitive shift, there's a couple pieces that I feel really, really important. And I think when I started to think about the cognitive shift, I was focused a lot on how we can take frameworks from systems thinking or principles from systems thinking and apply them to a social system map. And that is a big piece of it, and that's important. And so, for instance, we've done, Lisa Nixon and I are both practitioners of human systems dynamics. And so which has a whole bunch of models and methods around systems thinking or complexity in human systems. And so we often use this session every month for sharing one model or method for thinking in complexity, and then thinking a little bit about how that might apply to a social system map. But these basic fundamental sort of framings and methods for thinking about complexity, in a sense, that's why I started thinking about this and thinking, oh, these help us understand social system mapping so well if we apply them. So it's important to learn them. Lately, my thinking is going underneath those models and methods and frameworks, wherever they come from. And I think any kind of complexity thinking or systems thinking framework, if it's held up against a social system map and we say, what does this framework make us curious about relative to this map? Or how could this framework, how could this help us just be interested in the map in a different way? What does it bring up for us? It's not so much about how do we literally apply it mechanistically or as a parallel, but just how does it engage our imagination. And then what do we pull from the map based on that? So that's sort of how I've been holding it. But I'm really realizing more lately that there's some underlying more basic things that I think are important before we get to that shift, that practice of applying a model or applying a method, or that not before, but along with or underneath, one of which is really, really keeping in mind and noticing how our attention, I think our attention, what we give attention to, is the greatest power we have. And it is what creates our reality, and what creates what both enables and constrains what we're capable of doing together. And so what we're doing with our attention is super, super, super important. And we've been trained to pay attention in certain ways. We've been trained to pay attention to jumping to solutions when we hear, we hear a problem, we jump to a solution, or we see we see a system. And I was just, some of the reading I was doing over the weekend was Nora Bateson, who really pushes on all of these things. And she's talking about the notion of systems, so I'm quoting from her now, as being an arrangement of parts and wholes has become a distraction from this I'm quoting, I'll just start over. Quoting Nora Bateson, the notion of systems as being an arrangement of parts and wholes has become a distraction from the new systemic vision, which we're trying to encourage, that sees life as relational, mutual learning contexts, and that evolution emerges in interrelationality, not in arrangement. So so frameworks often are positing an arrangement. Like if we put all these things next to each other in this way, that's a system. And then if we move them around, that will be the shift. And Nora's pushing on us to recognize that the shift comes from the interrelationality, not only people relationships, but idea relationships and process relationships, and just how how our bodies respond to the situation, to what's going on between us. So I like to call those, I think Nora Bateson does somewhere, the atmospherics, which is like the way things feel between us. And so, and what that feeling makes possible or impossible. So I think even in the cognitive shift, I'm asking for us to pay attention to how our attention is creating the reality that we're in the moment, and how, as it creates that reality, it creates either more potential or it constrains our potential. And it's always attention. I mean, right now I'm talking at you guys. And so that's one thing that creates one kind of dynamic and isn't as potential creating as other dynamics could be, depending on what we're trying to do. But so there's always a trying to work out, what's most significant right now. But that ability to pay attention to what we're paying attention to and how that attention is impacting us together and our potential. There's a lot of it sounds, but that I think is a deeper thing than the frameworks. And then if we come at frameworks without that, the frameworks can just become more shackles, or can just become more blinders. So I've really been thinking about that a lot. And the other thing, another piece of this puzzle that I've been thinking about a lot is how the systems of dominance that we're trying to move away from have, they're held in place by the atmosphere. They're held in place by the norms and the ways we pay attention. And they're what we know and what collectively we're comfortable with, or have been sort of conditioned, ways we've been conditioned to seeing, and that going outside of those ways is uncomfortable and scary. And so that part of my theory of change with social system mapping is that we will learn how to understand living systems best by practice, by thinking, like working together to understand how we're thinking and shifting our thinking by paying attention in these more living system ways, but that if we're learning them by ourselves, if we're just sort of reading this stuff, the minute we put the book down, our brains go back to the, we look at our screens and we get exposed to the world and we sort of go right back to the norms. And this isn't necessarily everybody, but I'm saying as a general rule, the context is so much stronger than our ability to resist it, that we slide back into the safe, normal, socially acceptable ways of thinking. And that in order for us to actually make lasting change, we need to do it together. We need to support each other in it. And so it's a practice. It's like meditation. It's a thing we do over and over. It's not a thing we do once or twice and then we just say, okay, I got that. We get the ideas, but making them real is a different thing. So I'm just going to say one more thing before I put you back into groups. I'm going to share my screen. And now where was I? Okay. So I've been thinking about that and thinking about these two different, the cognitive shift and the relational shift, and how they work together, and how we have to go back and forth between the relational focus and the cognitive focus over and over in this sort of, rhythm, this back and forth rhythm, and how they support each other. And I just want to call out a couple ways that they support each other. And one of which is that it seems to me, and I'm not speaking for everyone, so if you feel like, no, I'm not afraid of complexity and not knowing stuff, and I would totally say I'm not trying to make you say you're smaller than you are by any means. Some of us, for whatever reason, don't fit that pattern, but a lot of people do. But if that's true, that we easily get overwhelmed, or we easily get uncomfortable, and we easily want to narrow things down and simplify it so that we know how to work with it and process it in our brains. If that's true, then especially when we're in groups of people where we don't feel safe or we don't trust other people, we're far less likely to go there. We're far less likely to say, I don't get it. We're far less likely to say, okay, well, this is a little inkling I'm having, but maybe it doesn't mean, we're less willing to take the risk of being in this new cognitive space and share it with other people if we don't feel safe and if we don't have a sense of belonging. So the more we make a place where we feel safe to think differently and to think in new ways, and to share that and discover how that works with each other, so that we know we're not going to be, our way of thinking isn't going to be diminished or eclipsed by a more normal way of thinking, or that we're going to get shamed or embarrassed, that development of the strong relationships makes it easier and less threatening for us to go into the unknown. And as we go into the unknown, our brains get more flexible in terms of how we process and how we make decisions, and that then feeds back into our relational space and helps us develop more trust and more sense of belonging in our relationships. So I'm just that's one way that they sort of turn into a flywheel and become this thing that sort of begins to have its own energy and pulls the whole thing forward. Okay, that was, I'm as often the case, I feel like I was circular and not sensible and rambling, because that's my own stuff. That's my own conditioned thing to judge myself in that way. And I'm going to stop. And Kara, you can, I'm just going to check into Marcia's comment before, just to, the reference, the Nora Bateson reference, is that what you're talking about, Alex? That is from an article called, it's either Aphanipoesis or, anyway, if you go to Nora, I'll make sure the links get in the follow-up email so that they're available. They're kind of dense, but I threw myself into them this weekend and started to make sense of them. it's just a couple Medium articles, but they're long. And then Marcia says, given the complexity, what would be useful in sense making aspect? Marcia, do you want to just say that out loud? If you don't mind, and maybe this is
Sure, sure. Well, it just, I'm understanding from what you've said and a couple of the others, that so the challenge seems to be in applying, or, you know, once you actually get the buy-in for people to create this mapping system, then how do you know, to apply it and make use of it, as you said, that something like frameworks from systems thinking or complexity might be useful. And I'm wondering I've done a little bit of that training, but I haven't really done enough of it because I don't really know where to go or who would be the official place, where would be the best places to learn that. Just based on our past experience, we did do some mapping once in another network, and it just didn't go anywhere. Nothing happened afterwards. And so I'm trying to kind of figure out, in order to get a lot of the same people are part of the same network I'm working with now. And so I really have to be able to show people that it can be applied, I think, in order to get them interested and understand the benefits. So
yeah. I would say, given that social system mapping is a different way of doing this sort of thing and is so new, that there's, you know, just about anything can be informative. And if you really want to focus on how we do this in this context, you should become part of our community. I mean, you should join us, or at least watch some of our recordings, or I mean, it's a conversation that is emerging amongst all of us, and we are the ones who are having this conversation in this context related to social system mapping. There isn't really another place where this question is being addressed. And
so are you saying that, so when you say join, watch some of the stuff, you mean you mean beyond this community of practice, taking some of the other trainings that you offer? Is that what you mean? Is that what you're saying?
well, I'm saying, I mean, anything that comes from greater than the sum is part of that you can avail yourself of, or,
Okay.
you know, in just becoming a member of our community is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you cover the whole range is what you're saying.
Yeah. But
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it isn't like a nice accessible package of stuff that you can access at the moment because it's emerging, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't need to look elsewhere for those specialized sorts of things. It's all sort of addressed within your realm of practice that you're trying to teach, is what you're saying.
To the degree that we're talking about applying it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But reading elsewhere is valuable. So I'm not saying.
Yeah. No, I didn't take it that way, but I didn't. I just thought that, like the human system dynamics, I thought that was sort of, I don't know, I thought there was a specialized agency or some.
Yeah. There, human systems dynamics is a separate school of it's its own institute with training around the models and methods, and that's really valuable. And it isn't explicitly about applying here that either. Right. So it's really useful. I'm gonna stop us and let's go ahead and put you back into the and Kara, I'm thinking, yeah. Okay, back into breakouts. And I just am thinking about what's coming, just wondering what's coming up for you. Like if you just check into your physical, your body embodiment and your emotions and your brain, like all of how and what you've seen so far and been listening to, just what's coming up for you and how is all of this feeling, and to just share that with each other to the degree that you feel like it. And is there anything surprising in any of that, or anything new that's coming to you out of that awareness? and let's say, Kara, come back. I was hoping to give us a little more, let's give us, give him 14 minutes with that minute thing. And have you, before you open it up, does anybody have any questions? I just want to make sure everybody's ready to. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Kara. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good conversation. Marcia, it's good to see your face. So we only have a couple minutes left. I was just going to say, I just realized I didn't explain myself, and I said a thing like how I feel at the end of when I was talking before, and I do that a lot, but I never explain why I do that, and so I thought I'd quickly explain why I do that, which is like I have a practice of noticing and naming what's going on, with me in my emotions and in my body and in my anxiety, because I get sped up, especially like I look at time and then I'm anxious, and then I talk faster and I get sped up. And so I have a practice of noticing that and just naming it. And I'm not needing anybody to take care of me about it or to tell me it's okay, but I know that when you're paying attention to me, when I'm sort of the focal point, that whatever's going on in me has an impact on you, whether, and telling you what's going on is my hope that I'm modeling, noticing and naming. So we all sort of are able, feel comfortable when we notice things that need to be named out loud, or at least knowing and noticing and naming for ourselves. So I'm both trying to model and also trying to just acknowledge the impact that I have on the space and that I have on you, whether I'm meaning it or not. And I know that sometimes I get sped up, and then I sort of can create this sense of like, wah. So I was doing that. And I was noticing that I was doing that because I was feeling uncomfortable because I didn't have neat piles of thinking. And I'm just going to say, so for those of you who don't do this regularly with us, we meet the first 3 Mondays of every month. So the first Monday is a sense-making session like today, where we talk theory. Second one is a on-ramp session where someone in the community shares a map that they have made, and we ask them questions and sometimes give suggestions, or open it up for discussion after they've shared an example map, so that we're all learning from each other and seeing each other's work. The third session is what we call a deep dive, where we sort of try to focus more narrowly on some aspect of this work. And so all of these are opportunities for shared learning or and helping us think together. And we also have our own social system map, where we try to put into practice all of the things we're talking about, and it's still a work in progress. But we have this map, and this are putting it into practice, so we actually understand the challenges. So we're not just saying, oh, go do it and it's easy, and what's your problem, how come you're not managing? We actually go, oh yeah, that's really hard because we don't have enough attention, and we don't have, we get it. We're doing this so that we actually do get it and can help figure out a way forward, as opposed to just telling everybody to do what we don't do ourselves. So we invite you to be on our map. Kara just put links to all of our Monday sessions, as well as link to the map. And if you're on the map, we invite you very much to keep it up to date. I just went in this morning and updated it, and I saw that Tom and Jim did also. I get a little, I know when people are updating it, and so I know who does that regularly. So encourage you to do that. And it's the bottom of the hour. And so we'll just, it's abrupt, but we're just going to go ahead and jump in and do our closing ritual, which is, for those of you who are new, we just all unmute, and I will count down 3, 2, 1, and then we just give each other our blessings and our well wishes and our appreciation, and have a nice closing to go on with our day. So jumping into that right off the bat. Ready? And I wish I had time to hear from you what you experienced in this, but I gave you more time rather than give us more wrap up time. So that's what that was at any rate. go ahead and unmute if you want to do this. And all right, so 3, 2, 1. Thank you
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you
blessed
so
day.
much.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
wonderful
Be well.
Blessings.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. Take care.